Okay, so lesson 6.1, this is part of what we did on Friday in class. Okay, so if you weren't here, you'll want to get these notes at some point. But we went back and we reviewed our property of exponents, and we used our exponents a little bit. Okay, that is important as we go through stuff here, trying to know how to do our exponents. Then we moved down to example 2a, and this should look similar to what we talked about. As I said, I think this was 6 hours notes because I did that afterwards. But we talked about cube roots. Cube root meaning something times itself a third time, right? We talked about that being cube roots. We talked about the cube root of 0.008 being 0.2. And this was my demonstration here, right? And I'm going to erase this because I have something else I'm going to write here in this spot here in a little bit. But this was my demonstration that, remember, a decimal place times a decimal place gives 2 decimal places in my answer. Then when I multiply by another one, we get a 3rd decimal place in the answer. The second one, the cube root of a negative. You need to know, okay, cube root of a positive is going to be a positive. Cube root of a negative is going to be a negative. Anytime it's a cube root of or a root of something like 100, 1,000, 10,000, if it's a 1 with so many zeros after it, that makes it easy to figure out. A 1 with 3 zeros is 10 to the 3rd. Okay? Because it was a cube root of a negative is a negative. And we talked about a fraction, and this is where I was really pushing it, wasn't I? Okay? So the cube root of 1/27. And this is where I said don't think about it as a fraction. Think about it as 2 numbers. What's the cube root of 1? 1. 1 times 1 times 1 is 1. And then what's the cube root of 27? And we came up with 3. 3 times 3 is 9. Times 3 is 27. So what's the cube root of 1 over 27? 1 over 3. Okay? So that was a little brief review of what we did Friday in class. Now, let's talk 4th roots. Actually, I'll leave that right there. The first one we're going to do is the 4th root of 1. So, when we talk about the 4th root of 1, I want to know what number raised to the 4th power can give me 1. Okay? So you would say, and when I write this, I can write it as the 4th root of 1. But 1 to any power multiplies to equal 1, doesn't it? Okay, I agree. What if I say there's a second answer? 1 is correct. I'm not arguing. I agree. 1 is correct.
-1.
-1. What happens when you multiply an even number of negatives? Yeah. So -1 times -1 is +1. And what I like to do is I like to say -1 times -1 over here is also a +1. +1 times +1 is +1. So what you've got to remember here, when we do the 4th root of 1, my answer is not just 1. MathExcel will count you wrong if you just say 1 when they want all real 4th roots, but it is plus or minus 1 is what I'm going to write. I don't remember on MathExcel. Do they require plus or minus 1, or do they let you put 1 comma -1? I don't remember, to be honest. You'll let me know, I'm sure. Okay? You guys will figure it out. But plus or minus 1 is what I would say there. And again, we are doing 4th roots here, and it wants all real 4th roots. Okay. What about -0.0001? Any thoughts on the 4th root of -1/100,000th, I think? No, 10,000, sorry. Negative 1 10,000. I will say there's a catch here, so I don't know. Did I just scare your hand back down?
No, I didn't know anyway.
Oh, okay. Without the negative and without the decimals, you're basically looking for the fourth root of 1, yes? Okay. Earlier, when there was 3 decimal places for a cube root, we had 1 decimal place in our answer. Here, 4 decimal places, I'm going to have, for a fourth root, I'm going to have 1 decimal place in my answer. But what's the catch? Four of what number multiply to be a negative? What do 4 positives multiply to be? A positive. All positives multiply to be positives, right? What do 4 negatives multiply to be?
Negative.
4 negatives are going to multiply also to be a positive. Okay, so the catch is, because of this negative here, there are no real roots. Compare this to a square root. Can you take the square root of a negative number? No, because we don't have 2 numbers that multiply to be a negative, do we? 2 numbers have to 2 positives multiply to be a positive, 2 negatives multiply to be a positive. So when we need 2 numbers don't multiply to be a negative, 4 numbers, they don't multiply to be a negative either. The pattern you've got to figure out here is, okay, cube roots, that's an odd root. We can take the odd root of a negative. Fourth root is an even root. We can't take an even root of a negative number there. So that's the catch you have to watch out for. Now, one more here, and that is the fourth root of 16 over 81. Again, don't stress yourself and say fractions, I can't do it. It's not a fraction. You're imagining things, okay? It's 2 numbers. Now, some of you are still saying, I don't know the fourth root of 16. Well, you've got options here. First of all, can you do some guessing and checking?
Yes.
Yeah. The fourth root of 16. 16 is not that big, folks. So pick a number and start multiplying it 4 times to see what you get. Okay? And if we start with 2, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So guess what? 2 to the 4th is 16. What about 81? If you take a guess, even though 81 seems a lot bigger than 16, don't go a lot bigger. 3 times 3 is 9. Times 3 is 27. Times 3 is 81. So, what is the fourth root of 16 over 81? 2/3 and negative 2/3. So plus or minus 2/3 is what I'm going to write, yes. It was an even root again, right? We were still working in fourth roots.
So every time it's even root, it would be plus or minus.
Yep. And that's exactly what I'm going to write out when we get to the end of this section. That's exactly what I'm going to write out. Now, some of you are doing just fine with the guess and check, I can guarantee. You're following along. Some of you are saying, okay, Mrs. Sargent, this whole guess and check thing, no. Give me a calculator, give me a way to figure it out. So, you guys got your calculators out?
Yeah.
I'm going to demonstrate on my calculator, but any scientific or graphing calculator can do any root you want it to do. Okay? So, you guys see that all right? Yeah. trying to get it so we can. Right here, see where I'm pointing? That's my square root. Okay, that will specifically do a square root. So if I do my second button up here, and then square root, I'm going to do the square root right there. So for instance, the square root of 36 is 6. Now, on my calculator, on the button above, I have the x root. The x root can be any root you want it to be. So what were we just doing there? We were just doing the fourth root of 81, correct? So for my calculator, I have to type 4 first, because I want to do the fourth root. And then I'm going to do second, and I'm going to do the x root. And so what my calculator is showing right now is that I'm going to be doing the fourth root of whatever I type next. So what do we say, 81? The fourth root of 81 is 3. Okay? Your calculator may be different. You're going to have to play around with it. Okay, you're going to want, some of you guys don't have calculators, you're not trying to figure this out. I would encourage you to grab a calculator and try and figure this out because you're going to want to know how to do this on the calculator. Okay? If your calculator is different and you're not getting it figured out, let me know and I can help. Okay? Did you find yours, Elena?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, math menu is your answer to where most everything will be found on a graphing calculator. There's other places to find it too, but okay. Anyone need help? Did you find how to do yours? As I said, you're all going to be looking for some type of x root. It just varies on how it is. Got it? Okay. I would make sure you grab a calculator and have it at your desk every day, guys. You're going to want it in this chapter. I promise. Okay. Let's talk with C. What's C asking me to do? Fifth roots. We're just going to keep getting bigger here. Okay? And then we're going to jump back down and talk about square roots, but you know. Okay. Fifth roots is generally, I think, about as big as we go, but don't quote me on that. I can't remember what Math Excel does for sure. Okay, so the fifth root of 0. I would encourage you to try and guess before you go to the calculator for this one. Fifth root of 0. What do you multiply by itself 5 times and still get 0?
0.
0. Any root of 0 is always going to be 0. Sorry. Okay, you guys are ahead of me, right? What about the fifth root of -1?
No.
So if we take off the negative, I'm assuming you guys would all be comfortable with saying the fifth root of 1 would be 1. Now, what about the fifth root of a negative? Can 5 negatives multiply to be a negative? Yeah, remember, an odd number of negatives multiply to be a negative. So what's the fifth root of -1? -1.
What about the I?
If we were doing a square root or a fourth root, that would be if it was an even root. Okay, so this is kind of what Jocelyn was pointing out here, that we had a fourth root, it was an even root. An even number of numbers can never multiply to be a negative. Okay, because pairs of numbers always multiply to be a positive. When you get an odd number of numbers, they can multiply to be a negative. So up here, when we tried to do the fourth root of a negative, it was a no-go. As would be the true with a square root, a sixth root, an eighth root, a 10th root. It'd be a no-go. If you have, up here, we had a cube root, which would be 3, right? A cube root of a negative was a negative. A fifth root of a negative is a negative. A seventh root of a negative would be a negative. A ninth root of a negative would be a negative. Are you kind of following the drift here?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I answer your question in there somewhere, Lorna?
Can you make us like a chart?
I'm going to make a little comment over here. Okay, just kind of not a chart, but just kind of a statement about odd versus even roots. So I'm kind of trying to save room over here. Okay. One more here. Fifth root of 32. You could guess before you go straight to the calculator. 2. Okay. And if you noticed, the fourth root of 16 was 2, right? So fifth root of 32 is 2. Notice, am I putting plus or minus on these fifth roots? No. Okay? That's only on the even roots that I'm doing that kind of stuff. Okay, one more before I make a chart or a box here. And notice all of these say real, right? So, Kylie brought up the eyes. We're not talking eyes. Okay, that was last, or not even last chapter, chapter before maybe. Okay, we'll do no real roots as opposed to eyes. But so what are the real square roots of 1/100th? 0.01. Thoughts? And here's what I see, is I see a 1, which should tell me something. And then I see 2 decimal places. I'm trying to do a square root. The calculator can always back you up, right? Lorna?
Would that just be 0.1?
It would be 0.1. The square root of 1 is 1. There's 2 decimal places. So each one of those in an answer, right? So 0.1 times 0.1 would be 0.01. Because we're in square roots now, is that my only answer?
No.
No, what do I need to put out front? Plus or minus. Did you notice I left a little gap there for those of you that were watching? I did that on purpose, right? Okay, so now it's a square root. 2 positives multiplied equal a positive, and 2 negatives multiplied equal a positive. So that's why we say plus or minus. Square root of -1. No real roots? Okay. If you go to your calculator and you try the square root of -1,
It says domain error.
yeah, your calculator's going to give you some type of error. This particular calculator says domain error. Different calculators do it differently, but you get some kind of error there. Now, technically, what do you know the square root of -1 is? If we're allowed other answers, it'd be I, right? Because the square root of -1 is I. But we only are talking about the reals. So this is no real roots. And one more here. Square root of 36 over 121. Again, this is not a fraction. You guys are seeing things if you're going to tell me it's a fraction and you can't do it. It's not a fraction. What is it?
2 numbers.
2 numbers. Can you do the square root of 36?
Yes.
Square root of 36, that should be one you should do without the calculator, I would think. Square root of 36 is 6. Some of you know square root of 121 without a calculator.
11.
So what is the square root of the fraction 36 over 121?
Plus or minus 6 over 1.
This is why some of you are going to get mad at Math Excel, aren't you?
Yep.
We're mad at me,
I'm
or
gonna end up throwing my iPad.
you're going to get mad at someone. Whether it be me, Math Excel, whatever. Life in general. Plus or minus. Because again, it's an even amount of roots. Okay? So plus or minus. So basically it comes down to you've got to be asking yourself every time, do I need plus or minus on this? Do I need plus or minus on it? And here's the deal. If it's an even root, square root, fourth root, you need a plus or minus. If it's an odd root, third root, fifth root, you don't need a plus or minus. And that's what I'm getting ready to write over here. And how much room do I need to do this? I think I'm going to, just so I make sure I don't run out of room, I'm going to erase this part. You guys writing with pencil and paper would probably be okay. So, odd roots. I'm going to start there. And I'm just going to write down information here to help you organize your thoughts. Odd roots. Now, when I talk about odd roots, which ones fit into odd roots here today? That was the
3, 5.
cube roots and the fifth roots. Technically, you could go bigger, right?
Yeah.
But that's traditionally how big we go. First of all, how many answers were in each of these cases? There was always one answer, right? Each problem had one answer. Did we ever put plus or minus?
No.
No. So one thing I want you to know is that there is, I'm going to say one real root is what I'm saying. And the other thing I'm going to comment on, what do you know about the sign?
If it's negative, the answer is
Okay.
positive.
If my original base was positive, my answer is positive. If my original base was negative, my answer is negative. Every time, yes? So what I wrote here, I wrote sign matches base. You could say sign matches, I don't know what you guys want to say.
I
But-
would put OG base.
Okay? You write something there. I wrote sign matches base. I don't know what you want to write. But that is the information I have to share about odd roots. Okay? Trying to organize your thoughts. That's my goal right here. Now, the other part we talked about was even roots. And when we did even roots, that specifically for us today applied to square roots and fourth roots. Okay? So square roots and fourth roots is what it applied to. When the original question was positive. So when we had a positive base, what do you notice? How many answers were there? There were 2. Because a positive base, fourth root of 1 was plus or minus 1. The square root of 36 over 121 was plus or minus 6 over 11. So a positive base every time is going to equal 2, and I'm going to say real solutions. Now, what do those 2 real solutions look like? Plus or minus. So I'm going to write plus or minus right there. That was if there's a positive base. Then the question becomes, what if there was a negative base? What was the fourth root of this negative 0.001 and net square root of negative 1? No real roots. So if there is a negative base, there's going to be no real roots or no real solution. And that is the information I have there about even roots. And again, I'm just trying to help you organize your thoughts. Okay, you got all the information you need there? Because as you notice, I don't have the next examples on this screen, so I'm going to my next screen. I do want to point out, the section we just did was finding all real roots. As they asked us these questions, did the question itself ever have the square root sign in it? No. The question itself never had the square root sign in it. So when we take the square root, they wanted both answers. Just keep that in mind as we go to this next section. Okay? Well, crud. Yeah. It's not exactly what I wanted to happen here. No, we're not going to skip it. I'm just trying to figure out on the fly. Well, you know what? I just don't have room to make notes. You guys have more room than I do. I don't really need much room to do most of these, so we're going to make it work. Not my original plan, obviously.
Can you just erase the stuff above it?
Well, I kind of want to leave it there for right now, but,
Can you scroll? Yeah, like the whiteboard.
well, the thing is, 6th hour, I am going to have to erase it. So, okay, you guys got what you need then?
Yes.
Because what I will do here. Okay.
Didn't even need to.
Did it end up moving? Yeah, what? I'm so confused. Oh, wait,
If she
what?
would've
I
moved
thought
it-
the reason
if she
you
would've moved
erased
it-
that was because it wouldn't go down.
No, if she would have moved it with the.
If I would have moved it when I went back, all that writing would have still been there unless I erase it. So, yeah. Okay. A. Notice the difference between the top section and the bottom section. Top section, they never use the radical signs, the square root signs, right? Here they're using a square root sign, cube root sign, whatever it is. That makes a difference in our answers just a teeny bit. Okay, not all the time though. So, cube root of -8. Your calculator can tell you that if you don't know what it is. The cube root of 8 is going to be 2. And what's the cube root of any negative? -2. So cube root of -8 is -2. No catches there. Okay, B. The square root of 4/100ths.
4.2.
Oh, plus or minus.
Yeah.
And that's where the catch is. Okay, so you guys all listening to. The square root of 4 is 2. There's 2 decimal places, so 1 per each root. So the square root of 0.04 is 0.2. If they wanted you to say plus or minus, they would have had a plus or minus in front of the radical sign. The radical sign, when they actually put that in the question, only means they want the positive root. Okay? If they wanted the negative answer, they'd put a negative in front of the radical. If they wanted both, they put plus or minus in front of the radical. And so what I'm going to put here is just kind of a comment that the radical sign, you guys know what I mean by the radical sign? The square root symbol, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That radical sign there represents only the positive root. Now, when I say that radical sign represents only the positive root, realize the cube root over here, I still get a negative. I still did a negative, didn't I? Excuse me. But that's because that answer was a negative. Here, the radical sign represents only the positive root, and this is in an even root situation. Okay? So the radical, when you do those square roots, those fourth roots, whatever, you're just giving the answer as is. Don't go all fancy there. Definitely did not get enough covered on Friday. I'm running out of time. Okay, what about C?
No reference. No.
Fourth root of -1? Can't do it. Can't do an even root of a negative. So no real roots. So those notes you have written off to the side there, they still apply for the most part, don't they? If you try to do 4th root of a negative on your calculator, it's going to tell you some type of error. Okay, D.
Would that just be
Two.
two? No, it's two.
It's just two. Right? Only two because
It's a debatable.
that's two.
I am curious, Justin. What's the calculator? I think is going to tell me what I want it to tell me, but no, you didn't do the right thing there. But okay, so there's a couple of ways we can think about this, but if we start on the insides, which is what order of operations tells us to do, what is -2 squared? That is 4. And what is the square root of 4 here? 2. Okay. If they wanted it to be -2, they would have had a negative out front of the radical sign. Okay. So that's just one you have to be careful of. I totally get. We often will talk, especially as we go on, what is the square root of when you square something? Well, normally the square root when you square something is just whatever it originally was. This is slightly different because when you square that number, it does become positive. Okay. Let's see if I can make it through what I need to make it through today or not. Yes, sir.
Hey, could I just take for 30 seconds or less 3 boys, Brewer, Gray, and Lovell, please?
Mhm.
Thank you. I'll have them right back.
We'll be here. He's a busy man tracking people down today. Okay. Next page. We're going to start talking about doing these roots and these powers. Notice what's included on this page that wasn't on the previous page?
Yeah.
We got to throw the variables in. Okay, we've got to throw the letters in. Now, right here, as we look at this, for any real numbers a, the nth root of a to the n, and you'll notice it says a if n is odd, and it says the absolute value of a if n is even. Okay, so we're going to work this through, and I'll, make some notes about, kind of make it easy for you. But what this has to do with is we have to consider, could that variable be a negative number or is it only a positive number? Because here's the deal. When we're working with numbers, we know if that number is positive or negative. In A, do you know what x is?
Oh, wait, no.
We don't know what x is. And most importantly is we don't know, is that x a positive or is it a negative? And that's where we have to do some thinking. So it all comes down to this n right here and whether or not it is odd or even. And I'm going to walk you through. That's going to be the best way I can talk about it, okay? So let's look at example A. The square root of 16x to the 8th, which when I say square root, what's the invisible number right here?
2.
It's actually a 2, right? The invisible one so often is a 1, but this time it's actually 2.
Well, I thought you were the X.
Oh, okay.
Easy too.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so square root of 16x to the 8th. First of all, what is the square root of 16? Square root of 16 is? 4?
Yeah.
Old news, right? So square root of 16 is 4. Because there's a radical sign, I don't want a plus or a minus. Just the square root of 16 is 4. Now, square root of x to the 8th.
8x.
No. So what x to what power times x to that same power is going to equal x to the 8th. What happens when you take the square root of powers? So, okay, a little side note here. X to some power times x to that same power equaling x to the 8th. What number would I fill in those blanks? Because what do our exponent rules say? If you're multiplying and the base is the same, you add the exponents. Now, okay, taking square roots of bases is a little, or of powers, excuse me, is a little bit different. You want the shortcut?
Yes.
Why would anyone choose the long one?
Okay, the shortcut
I like these.
that will always work is if we're doing the square root of x to the 8th, we're going to take the 8 and divide by 2 because it was a square root. Okay? Now, what is 8 divided by 2? So are you okay at this point if I write 4x to the 4th? Okay. Now, here's the catch. We have to decide if there's absolute value needed. Can the answer to a square root be a negative?
No.
Yes. The answer to a square root cannot be a negative, can it? Okay. So if the answer to a square root, which, and here's the deal, this is a square root, more specifically 2 is even, then if that's the case, we have to include absolute value around our answer as a possibility. And the reason this is because a square root cannot have a negative answer, and we want to prevent that negative answer. Okay, so anytime it's an even root, you're going to at least temporarily put square or absolute value on there. Now, here's the deal. The absolute value won't always have to stay on there. And Math Excel will only want it in a necessary situation. They don't want you just randomly throwing it on there. Do I need the absolute value around 4? Okay, so what does absolute value do to a number? It makes it positive. Yes. Absolute value makes a number positive. What do you know about 4? It's already positive. Do I need the absolute value to make it positive? No. So I will never need absolute value around a positive number. Now, the question is, do I need absolute value around x to the 4th?
Yes.
Now, we don't know what x is, right? Could be positive or negative. But when you raise a number to the 4th power, what's it guaranteed to do?
Positive.
Make it positive. Do I need absolute value to force x to the 4th to be positive then?
No.
No, because when I raise it to an even power, it's going to be positive. Okay, so what I want you guys doing here is I want you considering absolute value. Okay, you guys like your shortcuts, which there's good and bad to that, right? Because it was an even root, I had to consider absolute value. We'll never end up with absolute value around a positive number, though. And because this power was positive, we didn't actually end up needing absolute value. When we get to an example that ends up with a positive square root or a positive root and a negative exponent, that's when we'll actually have to keep the absolute value on there. Okay, and that is to force the number to be positive. And this is a really awkward ending. Because you're going to forget this all by tomorrow when I have to finish this section. So, you know tomorrow I'm going to be starting off by having to review this a little bit.
Yeah.
That 2-hour delay threw me off because I should have been able to get through this lesson in 2 days just fine. But that 2-hour delay threw me off. So, I guess that means, hold on and let me finish before you ask your question. I guess that means, as much as I want the homework to be due tomorrow and I want to stay on time, I'm gonna have to finish 6-1 notes tomorrow because I need to finish this a little bit. So I will finish 6-1 notes tomorrow and I will make 6-2 due on, what's that make it, Wednesday? Yeah, we'll do that. Okay? You still have your question, Lorna? Okay. Okay. You can go ahead and start working on some of your homework, and I would while some of this is fresh in your mind. Okay, but it won't be due until Wednesday. So I would try and work on what we've talked about here. If it mentions absolute value, I would hold that thought until we have time to go deeper into this tomorrow.
Okay, so what is the what does the